AI is definitely a hot topic in archviz and in basically any field at that point. Now, I wrote a few pieces on AI on CG Architect already, and while I always invite people to embrace new technologies, I also like to warn people about any new tools and to really be aware of what their use will entail, as it oftentimes has downsides that people are not even conscious of. So let's dive a bit into the different tools AI is offering us at the moment, its typical pros and cons, so that later in Diamond 9, when you learn how to fine-tune AI to fit into your workflow, you do it knowing full well how it is impacting your work and your creativity. What is AI in ArchViz? AI in the field of ArchViz is basically the idea of using LLMs in order to generate parts of or whole images in ArchViz or rapidly create variations of a given image. We've all seen stuff generated by Stable Diffusion or Midjourney, and the least we can say is that those images are pretty decent and evocative. Now, let's start with the upsides of what AI can bring us as ArchViz artists. Bespoke assets for a given scenario, like vegetation and people. It has always been a very tedious and non-creative task to just find the right cutout for your image. AI lets us generate them on the fly and refine them, move them around, so that they perfectly fit our composition and intent. This will help us in what I would call differentiation. You can also make quick variations for exploration, turning day images into night images, summer images into winter images, etc. This is basically light mix on steroid and can be very powerful. This helps us with efficiency, productivity, and creativity. AI, even though some results sometimes look awkward, does give a boost in overall realism at almost no cost. So this enhances the overall quality of our work. Eventually, we can also hope that AI and machine learning in general will cut rendering times almost entirely. NVIDIA is already working on it and getting promising results. We might even venture into thinking that the mere concept of ray tracing will just disappear altogether for pure AI calculation. Time will tell, but either way, this will mean faster feedback for when you are doing images, so again, an increase in productivity. Now, those are pretty good upsides, and I personally already can gauge their impacts in the quality of my recent work that included it. But for every new technology that brings some upsides, there are some downsides that are often minimized or clearly not advertised, so I'll tackle them here. AI-driven versus creativity-driven practice. I generally try to stay away from social media as platform, but with the rise of AI, I wanted to have a general look at what people were doing with this new tool. And as usual, there are a few people that seem to do creative stuff and others that seem to have just purely given up on bringing any value and are just going full AI in the most boring way. What I mean by that is that instead of having an artist-driven or creativity-driven approach to a project, they will have an AI-driven approach. Creativity or artist-driven approach means the artist, with their full knowledge, orientate the research, take decisions, and refine the process until finding the final image. An AI-driven approach is the opposite. You let the AI feed you the core concepts of intent, then feed you the results, and you pick within those results. This results in a higher chance of having scenarios unexplored if the AI didn't feed them to you. While you could potentially take this as a first step and rework it, I see most artists be more than happy with this as a final result and just call it a day. Another thing to keep in mind is that in 99% of the case, artists are not training their own model, which means that their artistic approach to ArchViz, their style, is completely lost in the billions of images that have been used in the training set. The numbing of the creativity muscle. Instead of actively looking for inspiration outside of the realm of ArchViz, you can end up relying directly on what the AI feeds you as a base to start from, which, as I mentioned in the inspiration part, is a very narrow-minded way of tackling a new subject. A big part of the value that you are bringing to the table for your client on top of your technical abilities is the way you look at things and the way you look at their projects. An AI will look at the project in a very basic way because it will just compile everything that has been done and give you a sort of average result. While the output can seem fine, the core idea is pretty, usually underwhelming. And the more you rely on this outsourced approach to creativity, the more you will numb your own creativity. In the same way that if you never train your eye to see creatively, you will never see an image and its internal dynamics clearly. If you put all the creative aspects on the AI and do nothing, you will slowly lose your ability to come up with new and original ideas. Another downside is the lowering even more of the barrier of entry. Generally speaking, lowering the barrier of entry to a market is a good thing, but there is always also a downside to it. People with no understanding of the fundamentals will flood us with average-looking images thinking those are pure art because they lack the understanding of what makes an image compelling or not. It was already the case before with the simplicity of use that nowadays rendering engines have that lead to a generalization of realistic yet extremely boring and predictable images, all done by artists that think that they have already reached the end of their career because they have no idea of what lies beyond realism and of how composition is actually the main driver of how their image will be received by clients. All this basically dragging down the general output in the industry and dragging down the expectations of clients who already were not really educated on the matter. We'll also see an emerging style that is already pretty boring. Now, interesting enough, the AI style we find in archviz is already very recognizable, just like a corona rendering is, for instance. This is fun because for the untrained eye, AI images look like photographs in the same way that all archviz renderings look the same. To the trained eye, AI images have a very recognizable type of grain and light diffusion on top of typical artifacts and weirdness. That make them stand out, not necessarily in a good manner. The main problem that I see with this emerging style is that the barrier to entry is so low that we'll get flooded with this new style of rendering, and this will be a double-edged sword. On the negative aspect, this means that creativity will, again, take a hard hit by flooding us even more with indistinguishable images of archviz. Your social feed will become even more boring than it already was. On the upside though, this means that any person that takes the time to tweak their use of AI and potentially train their own model will have great ease in differentiating their work from other more lazy artists that rely solely on existing tools without any tweaking. One can always be sure that when a graphic style gets so homogeneous, there will be space for new graphic styles to emerge because clients don't want to look like all of their other competitors, and visuals are the first thing that the end customer will see. So AI is a great tool. Whether it will take your job, enslave us, or steal your lover is not really the problem at hand. A lot of things can be done to make our lives easier, and this is what I will exemplify in Diamond 9 on how to maximize creativity and productivity. Keep in mind though that, and this is a general warning that you can actually generalize to literally any area of your life, is that when people are selling you something, they will always communicate and emphasize the advantages and keep quiet about the sacrifices. This is what the French economist Frédéric Bastiat encapsulated in his aphorism, that which is seen and that which is not seen. Sacrifices might sound like an exaggerated term here, but in the case at hand, relying blindly on AI is a sure way, yet discreet, to sacrifice your creativity. And this is a sacrifice that in the long term can only hinder your ability to work as an individual. I'll let you expand the logic on other topics as it seamlessly applies to any other field where AI is used. And on that upbeat note, let's move on to the next lesson.